I am Carmilla. I am come from far Styria to join the War Council.
The sole reason why Castlevania Animated garnered a passionate following around the franchise enthusiasts and even topped off the gaming popularity as the best video game adaptation on screen is simply because it offered a fresh take on the Dracula narrative which otherwise had become too redundant. Now, the Castlevania universe has achieved global acclaim, and despite variances between the show and the game, fans have embraced this Netflix adaptation to a point that we now have a very popular spin-off series at hand. Apart from Dracula's nuanced portrayal, the Castlevania animated series boasts an array of captivating antagonists, and we have been quite intrigued by their portrayal. In the second season of the show, viewers were introduced to Carmilla, a multifaceted antagonist who continuously surprised audiences with her ambitions and her audacity. Castlevania is renowned for its charismatic vampires, but what truly sets the series apart is the depth of each character and their motivations. This is especially true for Carmilla, the vampire queen hailing from Styria, who made it abundantly clear that she had no intention of taking orders from men. If Cypher Belnades is the embodiment of strong feminine energy within the series, Carmilla is no less than the very incarnation of femme fatale. Carmilla also has a strong presence in the gaming lore, where she is often referred to as Camilla and represented in various forms, from a malevolent floating mask to a spirit inhabiting a skull and even taking on different iterations. Well, in this video, we will do an intricate breakdown of Carmilla's origin, ranging from the animated series to the gaming lore. So without wasting another moment, let's get right to it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Carmilla of Styria? Carmilla's introduction on screen immediately left fans convinced that she was more than just a general as compared to other vampire generals in the court. She exuded the elegance and charisma of true royalty and born leaders. As the second season unfolded, her exceptional skills and sharp wit propelled her character beyond initial expectations. From the very start, Carmilla offered plenty to admire, ranging from her iconic fashion sense adorned in rich red and gold, combined with her long, snowy white hair and that bold red lipstick, which together created a visually striking presence. Her physical beauty possessed a commanding and dignified quality that captivated onlookers. Sporting an angular face and a slender frame, she deviated significantly from her in-game counterpart, and this variance proved effective. Carmilla's portrayal in the series reflects a departure from the typical voluptuous character design often associated with attractive female characters, allowing her beauty to shine in a distinct and impactful way. She is almost designed to look like one of those haute couture showstoppers, projecting an image of propriety and sophistication, while her action and motives are steeped in deception and cunning. Carmilla was first introduced as a general in Dracula's army, who arrived at Dracula's castle later than the other vampire generals, primarily due to her concealed agenda. Her discontent with Dracula's plan to annihilate mankind became apparent, as this would jeopardize the vampire population's access to stable blood supply. Centuries ago, Carmilla was turned into a vampire by an unnamed vampire lord, whom she eventually killed, citing his cruelty as her reason. She voiced her objections during her belated arrival at Dracula's War Council, reporting the defeat of the demon forces in the city of Greshit. In a bold move, she even openly defied Dracula in front of his entire court by questioning why he hadn't turned his wife, Lisa, into a vampire. Carmilla simply could not comprehend that he might genuinely love Lisa rather than exploiting her as a mere sex slave, which infuriated Dracula and shocked the other vampire generals. This reaction, however, was precisely what Carmilla had aimed for. Dracula summoned her to meet him in his personal chamber, calmly inquiring about her dramatic entrance and motives. He began by asking why exactly Godbrand called out to her for being a part of Dracula's court, to which she affirmed that it it was no more than his desire to sleep with her. She further asserted that such an event could only occur if all other male vampires dropped dead, along with half of the females and some animals. Now Dracula found mild amusement in her response and then directly asked her what she expected in return for openly incurring his wrath. This is when Carmilla explained that her actions were not meant to be offensive, but rather a straightforward and courageous inquiry, as she was the only individual brave enough to ask what the rest of them kept discussing amongst each other. How did Carmilla manage to betray Dracula? When Dracula declared that two of his human forge masters would lead the course of their battle against humanity, the vampire nobles in his court started growing resentful towards the decision. Now, it should be noted that almost all vampires could not care less about human lives and considered them to be nothing more than livestock. So being commanded by humans was inherently degrading for them. Naturally, there was a lot of infighting within the court, and most of these vampires feared that Dracula's plan to ethically cleanse the human race from the face of the earth would actually deprive them of sustenance or a steady flow of fresh blood, which could ultimately lead to their own extinction. In the unfolding events of Season 2, Carmilla made her unwavering stance clear that she was there for herself. Observing Dracula's vulnerability and lack of strategic planning, she recognized that she was once again in a subservient position to a man driven solely by his own madness rather than a calculated pursuit of power. By manipulating the other men in the castle, particularly Godbrand and Dracula's forge master Hector, she began to undermine Dracula's authority. After learning that Trevor Belmont, Cypher Belnardis and Dracula's son Alucard had united to vanquish Dracula, Carmilla grew anxious, recognizing the destruction their united power could bring. She advocated for an immediate strike against them, but her advice fell on deaf ears. Carmilla's methods might be ruthless and manipulative, but her motivations extended beyond mere greed and the pursuit of power for its own sake. Instead, she was motivated by her own traumatic experiences rather than simple misandry. In Season 2, we saw a brief glimpse into Carmilla's past during her confrontation with Godbrand. So eventually, her frustration mounted with Godbrand's incessant advances as he persistently believed she wanted to engage in a sexual encounter. Exasperated, she finally knocked him down and commented on Dracula's transformation into a despondent, aging figure reminiscent of her previous master. With her foot firmly planted on his chest, she reveals that she was turned into a vampire by a dominant male vampire who had started to lose his sanity. She was under his control, and her life was not her own until she decided to reclaim it. Carmilla was apparently bound to her sire, who was a mad old man trying to dictate her life. For years, she waited for him to give her the world he had promised her, but when he failed to deliver, Carmilla took matters into her own hands and took his life instead. As her actions were effectively driven by her trauma, having once regained her agency, Carmilla was determined not to surrender it, especially not to another old man like Dracula. When Dracula issued a directive for Carmilla to collaborate with Hector and Isaac, she capitalized on this opportunity to manipulate Hector. Now, Hector thought Dracula would save a part of the human population and keep them under control, but later Carmilla made him realize that he was being deceived and was simply an important pawn in Dracula's genocidal plans. Carmilla finally swayed Hector in her favor by pointing out that taking down Trevor, Cypher and Alucard was the need of the hour, and convinced him to launch an assault on the Belmont estate. She even got him to influence Dracula to target the city of Braila, which was not initially on his agenda. The Vampire Queen did not rush with Vector like she did with Godbrand, and took her time to skillfully sow the seed of doubt in Hector's mind about Dracula's sanity. Despite her flaws, Carmilla's intelligence shone as she masterfully exploited her opponent's weaknesses to her advantage. She cunningly employed Godbrand's insatiable lust for blood and sexual attraction to her by using him as a pawn in her schemes. Apart from that, she patiently worked on manipulating Hector's gullible and indecisive nature, meticulously laying the groundwork for his eventual betrayal of Dracula, which honestly was a testament to her shrewd planning. Carmilla went as far as planning for Hector to reanimate the dead bishop, who blessed the Danube River and converted the entire river flow into holy water, which ultimately devastated Dracula's forces in Braila as soon as they stepped out of the castle. Utilizing her vampire army, she orchestrated an ambush on them, leading them to their demise in the now sanctified water. water. By maintaining contact with Godbrand, she ensured she remained informed about the whereabouts of Dracula's castle, while also receiving status reports on victories and casualties in the ongoing war effort. It is likely that Godbrand informed Carmilla about recovering the bishop's body. Hector, under Carmilla's influence, was eventually convinced to side with her, leading them to orchestrate an attack on Braila, where a river port could be exploited and they could take over Castle Dracula by force. Immediately after this triumph, she forcibly took Hector with her and mobilized her troops for an assault on Dracula's castle. However, her grand schemes were foiled by Cypher, Alucard and Trevor, who were actually working on a spell to anchor Dracula's castle to one place, and hence teleported it upon the Belmont Hold before Carmilla could bring her plans to fruition. In a way, it is safer to think that this actually benefited Carmilla, because there was no way she could have survived the Dark Vampire Lord's wrath, given that even his demise was something he actually allowed or chose. But Carmilla did lose her entire army when the sudden teleportation displaced the holy water, resulting in the destruction of all of Carmilla's armies, with only Carmilla and Hector narrowly escaping. Following Dracula's demise at the hands of the heroes, Hector decided that he had endured enough of Carmilla's tyranny and attempted to break free from her, denouncing her as twisted. In response, Carmilla sadistically pummeled him in the most brutal way possible, landing at least 22 blows on his face whilst reveling in the violence. After enjoying the sight of Victor now beaten to pulp, her guards then restrained and chained him, declaring him her pet and basically shredding every last bit of dignity he had left. Carmilla's soaring ambitions after Dracula's demise. Despite her interrupted plans, Carmilla found an advantage in having Hector as her captive, providing her with the means to rebuild her forces and offset the losses she incurred at Braila. After a grueling 30-day walk with her decimated forces, Carmilla and her army reached Styria, while dragging a battered Hector barefoot through the snow. Their vulnerability was heightened due to the prolonged journey, making them susceptible to both human and vampire threats on the way. With their horses taken, Carmilla arrived at her castle in Styria to the Council of Sisters in a state of frustration, dirt and exhaustion. But it was during her journey that she came to the realization that her plan, aiming at eliminating Dracula, had disrupted the existing order and power structures in the known world. Even her seemingly foolproof plan had proved to be less robust than she initially thought. Despite their state of fractured might, Carmilla was already scheming to secure more power and establish a foothold in Europe. Anyway, after coming back, Carmilla recounted the hardships of her return journey to her loyal sisters, who welcomed her with open arms, providing Carmilla some much-needed solace. On her first day back at the castle, she indulged in a relaxing bath to regain her composure. However, it did not take long for Carmilla's ambitious plans to rekindle. She had her cartographer create a map of Europe and presented it to her sisters. Recognizing that Dracula's devastation had disrupted power structures throughout Eastern Europe, including their own region, to Braila, Carmilla proposed enclosing an 800-mile territory, trapping the scattered humans within. This audacious plan would significantly expand their borders and provide a sustainable source of livestock to feed them for centuries. While her sisters acknowledged the potential benefits, they also pointed out the flaws in executing such an expansive scheme, particularly with their drastically reduced forces. Nevertheless, the sisters, as always, committed to working together to make it work. Trigger would oversee the military aspect, Morana would organize the effort, Carmilla would continue her planning and scheming, and Lenore was tasked with persuading their captive Hector to create a night creature army while pledging his undying loyalty to Styria. Now she believed that Hector would be instrumental in creating night creatures and was convinced that her aggressive tactics, including betrayal, physical abuse and degradation, would coerce him into compliance. But this was a man who had been made to betray his master, beaten to a pulp, dragged across the continent on foot, thrown into a prison cell after being stripped naked and given stale maggot-infested bread to eat. Morana actually had to explain the implications implications of her approach, which led Carmilla to continue with her harsh methods, believing that torture would ultimately bend Hector to her will. It was actually Lenor's efforts to subdue Hector that made him more compliant. Meanwhile, Styria discussed with Carmilla the concerns about Hector's treatment, particularly the need for him to create night creatures. Carmilla remained resolute, insisting that Hector needed to be cowed, seemingly oblivious to the error in her approach. When Styria reinforced Carmilla's questionable plan by inquiring whether they would obtain a sufficient supply of fresh corpses without depleting their food source, Carmilla simply deflected the issue to Lenore, avoiding responsibility for finding a solution. Amidst the strategic discussions led by Styria and Morana, Carmilla engaged in a dispute with her sisters, fervently asserting that her original plan was flawless. But they disagreed, with Styria emphasizing the lack of clarity in Carmilla's proposal. Ultimately, Morana managed to refine Carmilla's plan, prompting Carmilla to insist that she was the true genius behind it all. When Styria acknowledged Morana as a genius, Carmilla quickly interjected to claim credit for the idea, displaying her inability to let another receive praise. This was when Lenore entered the room, urging her sisters to cease their argument, and revealed that she had not only made Hector her slave, but also bound him with a magical ring that compelled his loyal night creatures to serve their cause. The ring could inflict severe pain on Hector if he attempted any form of disobedience. Carmilla's response to this revelation was a bewildered bloody hell, and eventually they reached a compromise to allow Hector to move freely within the castle, living comfortably. Over the next 2 weeks, Carmilla seeped into isolation, while Morana and Styria led the war campaign, and Lenore found herself with little to do. Carmilla's prolonged seclusion led to an evolution of her original plan. She was no longer satisfied with limiting her ambitions to Braila, and was consumed by a desire to conquer the entire world. Growing impatient with Hector's progress in creating his forging hammer and showing diminishing tolerance for her companions, Carmilla underwent a diabolical transformation in her behavior, which was fueled by her tyrannical ambitions. In the final season, Lenore and Carmilla found themselves discussing Hector as Styria and Morana had been away securing distant lands for weeks. Lenore's boredom led her to Carmilla's chambers while she was diligently working on territorial maps of Europe. This was when she discovered Carmilla's true motivations. With a touch of sarcasm, Carmilla began by mentioning how much she would have loved having Dracula's castle, insinuating as if she did not have her own castle at her disposal. She remarked that her modus operandi involved taking things from stupid, evil old men, emphasizing her intent to acquire territory. Carmilla further pointed out that the land, villages and towns they planned to seize were all controlled by old men, and that she was going to claim them all, just like she acquired Styria, which once had belonged to a stupid, evil old man. When Lenore questioned whether Carmilla would ever be content, Carmilla responded with bitterness, recalling the memories of how stupid old men had taken so much from her throughout her life. Her vengeful and imperialistic aspirations had evolved into a quest for world domination, reminiscent of Dracula's goals. It became evident that Carmilla had initially deceived Lenore about the livestock plan, as it was never her true intention. How did the Queen of Styria meet her end? The day of reckoning arrived, where all good things ultimately met their end. Soon, Isaac opened a rift in the sky using his substantial transportation mirror, signaling the beginning of his long-anticipated assault on Styria. Carmilla, who had been engrossed in her study of the maps, was suddenly besieged by dozens of night creatures. The relentless onslaught triggered an explosive eruption of pent-up rage within Carmilla, and she retaliated in a brutal frenzy. Her eyes turned an ominous shade of red as she dispatched her attackers with relentless ferocity. She clawed, kicked, and sliced her way through the ceaseless onslaught of night creatures, leaving a gruesome pool of blood and severed limbs in her wake. Her dress was stained and wrinkled, her hair hung loosely, and her blade dripped with red as she staggered to her feet. In the midst of this chaotic melee, Carmilla eventually fell to one knee but mustered the strength to rise up again with a sword in hand. Utilizing Hector's traveling runes, Isaac entered the room where a protective force field had been erected to prevent Carmilla's escape. The two adversaries engaged in a brief conversation, and Carmilla, realizing that she stood no chance against Isaac and his powerful hordes, made a startling proposition. She offered to let Isaac kill Hector instead, seeking revenge for Dracula's demise. To her astonishment, the cold and resolute Forge Master had already chosen to spare Hector, signifying their shared intent to eliminate her. Carmilla questioned Isaac's motivations, pondering whether he had journeyed all this way solely to end her life. In an uncharacteristically philosophical moment, Isaac believed that Carmilla's death would ultimately serve a greater purpose. With little time for further discourse, Carmilla and Isaac engaged in a climactic confrontation, where she exhibited an impeccable fighting spirit but was ultimately overwhelmed when Isaac was joined by his most supreme night creatures. After a relentless and grueling exchange, Carmilla found herself cornered, and Isaac, aided by his best night creatures, closed in for the final confrontation. A visually stunning brawl ensued, with Carmilla's rage and inhuman abilities allowing her to hold out longer than most. Now, in no way was this a fair fight, because Isaac went in with a force, who took turns attacking her till she had no more left to fight back. Despite her last-ditch efforts, she was ultimately overwhelmed. With her clothes in tatters and her body now shutting down after numerous injuries, still Carmilla refused to surrender. Realizing her impending demise, she castigated her assailants, declaring them unworthy of her blood, and threatened to await them in hell, vowing to kill them twice. In typical Carmilla fashion, she asserted her position as the Queen of Styria and decided to take control of her fate. Rather than granting Isaac the satisfaction of killing her, she raised her blade above her chest, choosing to end her own life instead of perishing at the hands of a man, an act of defiance that reflected her lifelong struggle to surpass them. So the Queen of Styria indeed went out with a blaze of glory, spewing venom all the while. As her blade pierced her chest, Carmilla's body began to disintegrate, obliterating the entire room in a fiery explosion. Her body erupted in a cataclysmic detonation. In the end, Carmilla met her demise on her own terms, succumbing to the consequences of her relentless ambition and insatiable greed.
I am yours now. Do with me what you will.
Carmilla's gaming history in the Castlevania franchise. Now that we have fully covered Carmilla's backstory adapted within Netflix's animated series, let's take a look at her enigmatic conquests featured in the gaming history of the Castlevania franchise. Carmilla in Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest. In her initial appearance in Simon's Quest, she is introduced as Camilla, where she assumes the role of one of the three powerful bosses in the game. Referred to as Onna Kyuketsuki in the Japanese introduction booklet, which translates to female vampire or vampira in the English booklet, she is properly recognized as Camilla in a clue book discovered in the Devious Woods. In her inaugural iteration within the series, Camilla takes the form of a colossal flying ballroom mask, which features a hollow opening for the right eye and an attached gem-like stone on the left, from which a blood-like tear continuously drips. As you enter her chamber, the mask levitates from the floor to the room's center, initiating its attack pattern. Now, Camilla's method of attack involves trying a fiery teardrop that explodes into numerous fireballs upon striking the ground, which are then launched in a spreading pattern across the room. The mask follows this by commencing a clockwise flight, tracing substantial circles throughout the room. At intermittent intervals, it halts to release more fiery tears. During this encounter, the rib bone relic, which grants Simon a shield, proves particularly useful, as it can effectively deflect the fireballs launched by the mask. Players can attack Camilla when she passes near Simon as she follows her circular path through the room. It is advisable to maintain a safe distance from her flight path and strike when she flies within reach. Alternatively, the gold knife can be employed to swiftly defeat her. Each successful hit stuns Camilla and deals continuous damage, allowing for about 3 consecutive hits with each dagger. Upon her defeat, Camilla leaves behind the magic cross, which is required to gain access to Dracula's castle. Carmilla in Castlevania Rondo of Blood. Carmilla makes her appearance as the boss in Stage 4 of Rondo of Blood, accompanied by her loyal servant Laura. When Richter or Maria enter the boss chamber, they are initially greeted by Carmilla's mask, paying homage to her previous portrayal in Simon's Quest. Behind the mask, Carmilla emerges as a colossal nude maiden, and the mask shatters into fragments, revealing a giant skull hidden behind it, while she levitates behind it. As she hovers in the air, Carmilla's presence is accompanied by a shower of fiery tears of blood that scatter throughout the room upon touching the ground. Concurrently, Laura moves back and forth in an attempt to capture and immobilize the heroes. If she succeeds in doing so, she restrains them and drains their supply of hearts. Carmilla in Castlevania Dracula X. In Dracula X, should Richter Belmont fail to rescue Annette during his quest, a significant change occurs as he reaches the summit of the clock tower. A colossal skull descends from the heavens and takes control of the defenseless Annette before Richter can intervene, leading to her transformation into the vampire witch known as Carmilla. In this altered state, Carmilla replaces Death as the boss of the level. While Carmilla's physical appearance bears some resemblance to her depiction in Rondo of Blood, her attack patterns differ significantly. Here, Carmilla's attacks closely resemble those of Shaft, another character from the same game. This unexpected twist adds a unique challenge to Richter Belmont's encounter with Carmilla, demonstrating the game's dynamic and branching narrative. Carmilla in Castlevania Circle of Moon. In this game, Carmilla is portrayed as a prominent character with her own castle situated in Austria. Her primary objective is to orchestrate the revival of her master, Count Dracula, with the intention of uniting the forces of darkness under his banner. It is worth noting that the events in Circle of the Moon unfold within an alternate continuity. As a result, they are not considered part of the main canon of the Castlevania series, distinguishing this particular storyline from the established narrative in the franchise. Carmilla in Castlevania Dracula X Chronicles. Here, Carmilla's battle closely mirrors her original incarnation in Rondo of Blood. However, the gameplay mechanics have been updated, and the overall difficulty has been somewhat reduced, making the encounter much more manageable for players. Moreover, it is important to note that while it is not Carmilla herself, the consequences of failing to rescue Annette in the game are noteworthy. In such a scenario, Annette undergoes a vampiric transformation, similar to the one that led Annette to become Carmilla in Dracula X. However, in this case, Annette transforms into a lesser vampire instead of Carmilla. This intriguing twist adds a layer of complexity to the game's narrative and the potential outcomes for the characters. Carmilla in Castlevania Grimoire of Souls. Carmilla's involvement in the narrative is quite intriguing, as she is said to have possessed Annette, or a copy of her, stored within the grimoires. This possession ultimately leads to Annette's transformation into a lesser vampire, a reference to events in both Dracula X and the Dracula X Chronicles. However, the story takes a twist when Alucard and various other copies of the grimoire work together to exorcise Carmilla from Annette. This joint effort successfully restores Annette to her normal state, free from Carmilla's influence. Carmilla in Castlevania Judgment. Galamoth hatches a sinister plot to deploy the Time Reaper, a deadly entity from a distant future 10,000 years ahead into the past, with a mission to eradicate Dracula and reshape the course of history. Amidst this temporal turmoil, a mysterious time traveler named Aeon unravels his scheme and assembles a group of champions, each plucked from different historical eras within a dimensional rift. Their collective purpose is to identify the chosen one capable of thwarting Galamoth's malevolent servant, the Time Reaper. Here, Carmilla emerges as a female vampire who venerates Dracula as a deity, deriving immense pleasure from hunting and terrorizing humans. The gruesome act of tearing into humans and bathing in their splattered blood is her source of delight. To Carmilla, humans are mere prey. She holds them in utter contempt. Her demeanor exudes aggression and provocation, and further interactions reveal that Carmilla bears the responsibility for instigating witch hunts that led to the persecution of Cypher Bernardus' clan. This malicious action has earned her a deep-seated grudge from Cypher, adding another layer of complexity to the web of relationships among these extraordinary champions. How powerful is Carmilla? As one of the most powerful vampires in the franchise, Carmilla possesses remarkable physical attributes. Her immortality ensures she remains eternally youthful and retains her impressive strength, surpassing that of ordinary humans and most vampires. She displayed her strength when she easily overpowered others, such as kicking Godbrand down a staircase and pinning him to the ground with her foot. Carmilla was also witnessed carrying Hector and beating him with little effort. Plus, her agility allowed her to perform nimble acrobatics even while wearing heels. She demonstrated incredible stamina by fighting hordes of night creatures, covering the floor in blood without showing signs of fatigue, as she sliced through one monster to the other. In addition to that, Carmilla can move at such blinding speeds that it appears as if she disappears in a blur, leaving her opponents absolutely bewildered. Her proficiency with a curved blade, similar to a shashka, is also evident, as she swiftly dispatched legions of night creatures, revealing her impeccable skills in a fight. Carmilla's understanding of Dracula's castle's working is another asset. She identified remote control attempts and recognized when the structure resisted, indicating her knowledge of the mystical elements within the castle. Despite not displaying significant magical abilities, Carmilla's intellect and strategic thinking were instrumental in her coup against Dracula. She used her charisma and manipulation to sow doubt among his allies, turning them against him. Her power of persuasion even convinced Morana, Lenore, and Striga to support her expansion plan, despite its impracticality and the immense effort it would require. Carmilla's ability to influence and lead those around her was her most potent weapon as a queen. Furthermore, even in death, Carmilla was deadly, as witnessed through her capacity to self-destruct by impaling herself with a curved blade, resulting in a violent eruption of violet flames that could obliterate structures. Marvelous verdict. As far as the multifaceted villains go within the Castlevania series, Carmilla surely is on the reigning top. While it is clear that she lacks redeeming qualities, her character is a product of the broader themes of sexism and the abuse of power that exist within the Castlevania universe. She embodies the consequences of these themes as she views herself and her gender as a potential oppressed group, which drives her to operate in extremes and fuels her ambition to challenge the privileges and advantages of the male members of the vampire race. The direction the producers of the show took with Carmilla was indeed well written, as it added depth to the series by exploring complex themes and character dynamics. Her character's development and her ultimate fate at the hands of a man from the species she deemed weaker created a compelling narrative arc that resonated with the broader themes of power, revenge, and oppression within the series. Overall, Carmilla's role as a villain was significant and thought-provoking, making her a worthy addition to the Castlevania series, as her character added layers of complexity and depth to the story, while raising important questions about power dynamics in the world of Castlevania. Now that we have reached the end of this video, what do you think about this character? Let us know in the comment box below.